Hello everyone, and welcome to our last exercise in Introduction to Programming with Java. The topic of this exercise is data structures and algorithms. And today we will shortly cover big picture, and afterwards we will dive into programming tasks. So this topic was already covered from the theoretical perspective very extensively in lecture videos by Stefan Lessmann. So I will advise you first to watch those videos and afterwards come back to this exercise. So this topic is the last one, as I already told you, and within the Java Foundation exam of Oracle certification, this topic covers suits very good to arrays and array lists. And within OCP Part 1 exam, we are covering programming abstractly through interfaces from the data structure perspective. So today's material that we are going to cover is going to be about wrappers, data structures and algorithms. So let us get started with wrappers. For this purpose, let us open our Eclipse, and you will have to create a new package. This is our sixth exercise, and now we will create a new class that is called wrappers. So what are wrappers? You have already heard several times, at least, that everything in Java is defined through classes and objects. And the primitive data types that we have learned at the very beginning of our class, all of them have corresponding wrapper class. So you know that there exist 8 primitive data types, so correspondingly there exist 8 wrapper classes for each of those primitive data types. So let us write our code directly in the main method. So first let us create the main method, public static void main, string with some arguments, and we will put our code here inside. So first let us say that we have 2 primitive data types, one of integer type and another one of long. First part, primitive data types. The first integer is called int primitive, and let us initialize this variable with 5, and another variable is of type long. The name of this variable is long primitive, and we are initializing this variable with the value 20, and do not forget to put L afterwards. You can also put here small l, but it is advised to write for long capital L, so that you can distinguish it from I, big I, capital I. So these are our 2 primitive data types, and now let us convert those 2 primitive data types to a wrapper class object. Second part, converting from a primitive data type to a wrapper class object. So in order to convert from primitive data type into wrapper class object, you will need to use the following syntax. First, you are writing from, for example, first what we are going to do, we are going to do this for integer, for this our variable. And we are writing the wrapper class name, that is integer. Then we are writing the name of the new object. It will be integer object. We are using keyword new integer, and our in braces we are putting our integer variable primitive data type, that is int primitive. So you see that this construct is pretty similar to you. And as you maybe have already understood, this is, here we are using constructor from integer class. Using constructor from integer class. So what we want to do, we now want to print some values to our console for our convenience, just in order to see what we are doing and what is happening here inside. So let us print out the following statement. We are using system out print line command, and inside we want to write the value of the primitive type and now we want to print out this value of our primitive data type variable. So, and let us do it into different statements. And the value of the wrapper class object is, and we are putting here the name of our wrapper class object. So let us now run this, and I'm pressing, you don't see, but I'm pressing now Ctrl F11. You could also press here run. So we see that the value of the primitive type is 5 and wrapper class object is also 5. So that is true. They have the same values inside. So this is how we did it for our integer variable, and we have also long. So how do we do this the same for our long variable? So similarly to this statement, here we had integer wrapper class name, so now we need to use the long. We are putting now the name that will be long object, and in the similar way we are writing new keyword. Afterwards here we had integer wrapper class name, and now we have long, and in our braces we are putting the name of our long variable, that is long primitive. And here it. So we will also print the same statement, so I will just copy them and the value of primitive type, and we put here long primitive and long object instead of int object. And now let us run, and indeed you see the same values for those two statements, print line statements. So this was converting from a primitive data type to a wrapper class object. Another option is when you want to convert back from wrapper class object to primitive data type. Converting from a wrapper class object to a primitive data type. And in this way you will need to write the following statement. First, you're writing the primitive data type at the beginning, that is int. Then you're putting the name of your primitive. This will be int primitive 2. Now let us say back. And then you're using the name of the object and a specific method. So in order to use the method that is that this object has, you're putting the dot, and you see actually all the methods here, and we want to use int value method, this one. So you can see returns the value of this integer as an int, exactly what we want to have. And we want to have some statements to be printed out to our console. That's why we are using print line, and inside we are writing the value of the wrapper class object and we are putting here the object and the same for primitive. And here we are putting the name of our variable, primitive data type variable. So let us run. And you see 5 and 5. So that is exactly what we were expected to see. Let's do us the same for our long variable to convert from this long object wrapper class into long primitive data type variable. So for this purpose, similarly as here, we are writing first the name of the data type, that is long, and then we are putting the name of this variable. This will be long primitive back, and we are using here actually the same way. However, our object was not integer object, it was long object. So we are putting here long object dot, and we find our value, but if this is not int, we will put here long value. And we will use this variable in the following statements. Okay, so now we are running and we see the results with values 20 for those for object long and primitive data type variable. So here you see how you can convert from primitive data type into object, into wrapper class object. And if you need, you can also convert back from wrapper class object to primitive data type variable. So in Java, you have very nice thing as automatic conversion, and this makes life much easier for you. This concept is called Autoboxing. So this is number 3. It is Autoboxing. So if you want to convert from integer, from primitive data type into wrapper class object, you are accessing primitive types as if they were instances of an object. So previously you would write this statement: integer int object is new integer, and here you would put your variable integer, a variable of primitive data type. So if you want to use autoboxing, then you can write it in much shorter way. So you are writing integer int object 2 equals to int primitive. So here you just writing the variable name just immediately. So you are saving some time and some code. And the same if you would like to do this for long. Initially you would write this statement. So what you do, you are just shorting all this. So you are doing as if you would, let us name it with 2. You are doing as if you would access these primitive data types as if they were instances of this wrapper class. And similarly to boxing, there is also unboxing, when you're doing in another direction, you're converting in another direction from wrapper class object to primitive data type. So previously you would write this statement, and when you want to use unboxing, you would do it in the following way. So we name it the variable in another way, and you're just putting the name of this object here. So much shorter, and the same for our long variable. This would you would write this statement you would write previously. However, now you can write this way if you are using unboxing. Okay, so first that you need to remember is that in order to convert from primitive data type to wrapper class, you can use the shortened version via autoboxing. And if you want to convert from wrapper class object to primitive data type back, then you're using unboxing. Why would you want to use wrapper class objects instead of primitive data types? Well, first reason, of course, that in Java everything consists of objects and instances. But the main advantage of this whole concept is that when you are using wrapper class object instead of primitive data type, you can use the whole bunch of very useful methods that are already in those wrapper classes. For example, let us try using some of those useful methods. Some useful methods. And first we'll convert string to a primitive data type. So string converting string to a primitive. Let us assume that we have a string variable that's name is my string, and its value is 246. So you can convert this string value, this variable of string data type, into some primitive data types. And let us say that you would like to convert this number that is now as string, you would like to convert this number to integer variable. In this case, let us say in this case you would need to write the following statement. So int, and this is the desirable data type that we would like to receive out of this number, this string. Now we are putting the name of this variable, that is primitive. And next, in order to convert this string into number, you are using the method from wrapper class, integer dot and parse int. Parse int is exactly the method that you would like to use, and here inside you are putting the name of your string that you would like to convert. So let us print something to the console. So the value of string is, and we are putting my string here, and then next the value of int is, and we are putting here the value of primitive, name of our primitive variable. Okay, so you see, so for you in the console you don't see the difference between those two numbers. However, for Java there is very big difference, since the value of this string variable is perceived as string and the value of this int is perceived as a number. So sometimes you would like to convert a string not to integer but to some other primitive data types, for example for too long or too short. In this case you would need to use the corresponding methods. So converting strings, and you would use parse byte method, parse short, parse int, parse long, and parse float to convert from string to the corresponding primitive data types. Sometimes it can happen that you have not a number inside of a string, but some letters or some words, some characters. So in this case, Java will throw you an exception. So let us consider such case when you have a string, another string with value ABC, and then you would like to convert this string to, let us say, to long, L primitive is the name, and you are using the parse method, and you're putting the name of your variable inside. So when you would like to execute this, you would receive number format exception. Here you see this. We have already learned exceptions, so you know that this is the name of exception, and you see the line where it happened. It was line number 60. So this is exactly the line where we have this error. I will comment this out with Control/. Okay, so to summarize, when you want to convert from primitive data type to wrapper class object, you are using autoboxing. When you want to convert back, you're using unboxing. If you would like to use some specific useful methods from wrapper class objects, then you would need to first convert your primitive data types, and then you can use those methods. Especially very handy, very useful method is a method that allows you to convert the numbers that are in your string, that are saved as a string data type, and you would like to use those numbers afterwards as real numbers. So an example for this case can be when some users would need to insert some numbers in your program, and those numbers will be first perceived by your Java code as strings. So they will be saved in your data bank or somewhere else as string, but afterwards you would like to use those numbers in some calculations. So you would need to convert those numbers that are saved as strings to integer data types or something else. In this case, you would use those parsing methods.